Welcome to this week's Fireside Chat with Jesse. I am joined today by Lovern from Love Life Now and Boston Financial and Equity, and Nancy Robles, President of Eastern Funding. Thanks for joining me, ladies.
Thank you for having us, Jesse.
Yeah,
No,
thank
it's
you.
it's great to have you on here. October's Domestic Violence Awareness Month, so we found it prudent to have an open and honest discussion on the acts of domestic violence and how it impacted your ladies' lives, and what can we do kind of as an equipment finance industry to continue the awareness around it, and hopefully kind of put an end to this kind of global epidemic of domestic violence. So, Lovern, we're just going to start off with you, if you don't mind. Do you mind just kind of
Yeah.
sharing some of your experiences and how this has impacted your life?
Yeah, absolutely. So I run a foundation that's called Love Life Now Foundation, and we promote year-round awareness around the issue of abuse. We want people to be in the know about prevention, red flags around this issue, what resources are available, and how anybody can be part of the solution in supporting victims and survivors that have experienced this issue, as well as on the prevention end. So we try to keep this issue in as much as in the forefront as possible. And I come to this work as a child witness to the issue, as well as a young adult survivor from a 2-year relationship that I escaped. And this work has been prudent for me because of my experiences with the issue, watching our father brutally abuse our mother, and then subsequently myself falling into that relationship, which I thought, for all intent purposes, I would never end up in. I always said that it would never be me. And unfortunately, children, I tend to say that they are observational learners. We learn and see from our parents a lot of the things that we go on to perpetuate in our adult lives for the good, bad, or indifferent reasons. And, what I took a lot from my father was not only, what I deemed to be his articulateness, his charm. A lot of folks say that of me, and that reminds them of him in me. But I also learned what it was to receive love. And my first serious relationship became abusive because a lot of the traits that my abuser exhibited were things that I saw from my father and I deemed as acceptable at some point in time during the relationship. So, for 2 years, I stayed in that situation, believing that this is where it was at. This is what relationships entailed, until I got to my breaking point, which is a lot of what victims have to get to when they decide that they've had enough. But a lot of folks do not get that chance. A lot of folks get to their breaking point and they decide that they're going to leave. And unfortunately, you turn on the news and you hear, she was getting ready to leave and this happened, or he was getting ready to leave and she snapped. Because I do want to point out that this issue goes both ways. But 90% of the time, men are the perpetrators. And so it's just been very important to us as a foundation to raise awareness every which way around. So talking to men and getting men involved in the conversation, talking to women and young girls about prevention and red flags, and ways that they can talk to each other and to keep each other safe, and vice versa. But that's what's driven me in this work, and being involved in the equipment finance industry over the years since 1999, off and on. It's been a real honor and a privilege for me to be able to talk to others about this issue one-on-one, and to be able to hear from folks about their experiences. You work with your colleagues on a day-to-day basis, and you look at them face to face and you're doing business with them, but do you know their backstory? And not necessarily that everybody should know everyone's backstory, but really understanding that everybody is coming into many different industries, including the equipment finance industry, with stuff. And I think this is a good segue to pass this on to Nancy, because I think Nancy's done a really great job of pointing out that stuff comes in many very different forms, including domestic violence as it relates to our mental health. And so her awareness that she's raised on that front is something that I am very proud of, and something that that I hope continues. So Nancy.
Thank you, Lovern. It's hard to follow up everything you've done and how amazing you are, but thank you. So I'll just say, personally, domestic violence, my connection to domestic violence is that I've been surrounded by domestic violence my entire life. In my home, my father was abusive to my mom, and then growing up, I've had multiple relationships that were very physically abusive, and so I've experienced it in every stage of my life. So it is something that continues, and it's not continues in my life, but it's very much a inherited multi-generational issue. And just to say, just 20 people are abused or experience domestic violence per minute in the US. There's about 10 million people a year. And for those who don't understand exactly what domestic violence is, it is about power and control. It's about intimidating your partner and taking away their power. And that can come in the form of physical violence, financial abuse, psychological abuse. So it's not just violence in the most obvious ways. So, people often don't understand that they're victims of domestic violence. But even, and also to add to that is 70% of homicide and suicide events are related to domestic violence. So what Lovern was just saying about people having the opportunity to get out of those situations is very difficult, because there's a very high probability that it will escalate to very violent situation. And it's often women or victims or survivors who are afraid are justified. That fear is very justified. It's not one of those situations, oh, he's just going to push you, and no, it can escalate very much so, and we see it every day. But my approach to the domestic violence issue is more about the mental health perspective. And it's because a part of what also holds us back in that circle, that cycle of domestic violence, is the shame and guilt perpetuated by the judgment and stigma of domestic violence. In recent years, there have been a lot of studies that have shown that when a victim leaves an abusive situation, their brain actually craves the cycle of the chemicals that are released. So when you go through the lows of the abuse and the fear, your body releases cortisol and other chemicals, because that's how your body responds to threat. And then when there's the high, the makeup, the I'm sorry, it won't happen again, then there's the dopamine and other chemicals that our brain releases that makes us feel good. That's literally comparable to being addicted to heroin. That's the withdrawal that victims go, their bodies literally go through withdrawal of these chemicals in their brain. So the shame part comes from, I miss that person who is incredibly abusive and hurts me and I'm afraid of, not understanding that it's not because they're weak. It's not because something's wrong with them. It's not because they want to be abused. It's because their body is literally craving what happens internally to be able to cope with those things. On the other side of it is the perpetrators. Oftentimes, a lot of men, or it's not always men, I'm sorry, I keep using that, that's a stereotype. But a lot of times the perpetrators don't seek help because of the shame and the stigma that's associated with, I'm a bad person, I do these bad things. And the reality is that if you grow up in a household where you witness domestic violence, that becomes a way of dealing with conflict. It becomes a way of, I'm dysregulated, I'm having a conflict with this person, I want to control the situation. I learned by watching how you control a situation. You intimidate the person, you use abuse, you do these things that will frighten the person, and then now you have them under your control. Not because you're a terrible person, but because you have learned that this is the way you behave. Their behaviors, they're not your personality, they're not who you are. So until we destigmatize both what victims and survivors experience and also what the perpetrators are experiencing, then it's almost impossible to end the cycle, because it has to come down to, these are behaviors, these are things that I've learned, and I can change that. I have the power. It's not easy. It's hard as hell.
But
I
it
can
can
speak
be
from,
done.
yes, I speak from personal experience. I have PTSD. It takes a lot of work for me to change my behaviors. And when I get triggered, I'm flooded with emotions, I'm flooded with chemicals, and I have to work through those things and all kinds of stuff. But it can be done. You know, whether you're a survivor or whether you're a perpetrator, you can take your power back, because it's about giving up the power. When you resort to the behaviors that you learned as a child, then you're just giving up your power to the situation. Also, to add to that, there's a couple books I just want to name real quick. There's The Body Keeps the Score, which is a book that talks about how people who have experienced trauma, right? And perpetrators have experienced trauma just as much as victims have, right? Because these are learned behaviors, and how that trauma stays within your body and how it works itself out, right? Meaning it impacts your health, the way you behave, the chemicals in the brain that take over, and so your executive functions don't work as well as they would normally when you're triggered. So that's when the part of your brain that, you know, you go into these behaviors are unconscious, and they're very much programmed into you. And then there's another book, It Didn't Start With You, that actually says that if, for example, let's say my grandmother experienced, because domestic violence has been in my family generationally, one generation after the other. My grandmother experienced, she was a victim of a domestic violence. So her DNA changed. And so my mom's DNA changed. And so my DNA changed, right? We inherited the change in her DNA. And whatever coping she felt that she needed to use to deal with her situation. So she felt helpless, she was afraid. So maybe the way she dealt with it was by staying and trying to control the situation, trying to avoid conflict. So my mom somehow inherited that in her DNA, and then I inherited it. And so the cycle continues because our DNA has changed to accept, or to not accept, but see some of these behaviors as normal, and then we've developed coping mechanisms that actually perpetuate it. And so it is so interesting, for one, but aside from that, it's accepting that a lot of this is it's not a choice that we make. It goes way beyond what we're consciously doing, and that we can take our power back by educating ourselves, doing the hard work of healing for both the perpetrators and the survivors. And actually that's the only way we can end it, if people
Yeah.
recognize that it's a mental health issue.
So I love everything that you said, but I'm gonna just push back on that very last point, because I do believe that this issue entails choice at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I do. I absolutely 110% agree that again, children are observational learners, and we inherit behaviors and attitudes around what we see in abusive settings, aka our homes
Mm-hmm.
and our communities. Yes. But I do believe that as we get older, we do have the capacity of choice.
Mm-hmm.
And when we get to certain stages in our lives, domestic violence, coercive control, which is another term that's being sort of widely used, that sort of covers a lot more
Mm-hmm.
around the issue. It becomes a choice, and just as
Absolutely.
we as victims, survivors, and perpetrators make the concerted choice to
Mm-hmm.
stop or to look at what we've been doing all along and to try to correct those behaviors or change those behaviors, it's the same way that we
Absolutely.
willfully choose to cause harm to our partners, whether that be, as you said, physical, emotional, mentally abuse someone. And so, again, like you said, it can be done, but it takes
Yes.
a lot of work from our end as survivors to unlearn the behaviors that were taught to us by
Mm-hmm.
our grandparents, our parents, that said, this is what relationships entail. This is how you receive love. Um, Perpetrators in the same way can say, Eureka, I realize that I'm causing harm.
Mhm.
And I want to do better. And like you said, it's not an overnight shift. It's not an overnight, there's no overnight cure. But I think so. I was on a radio show a couple days ago with the
Mhm.
co-organizer of one of the foundation's initiatives that we're hosting in a week or so. And the co-organizer said something that I also agree with. He said that the conversation of awareness has now become twofold. Where before, back in the day, um, men were having one conversation about domestic violence where it was absolutely accepted by every single one of the men in their
Mhm.
communities. She looked for it, man, that's the way you treat your wife, and she needs to listen to me because I'm the provider, and all this other stuff that was happening. And then women were having another conversation behind closed doors. I think I deserved it. And, oh, this is happening to Nancy next door. Oh, you better don't say anything because he might get upset. There were two different conversations, but
Mhm.
now with the sort of the onset of social media, now we're having, when you see, let's say, celebrities are being affected by this issue and it's a national story, or, someone else, a high profile cases all around the news. And I said to him, I said, I'd love to jump in the comments because I love to see what the temperature is between both sides. And what he said is that now the conversation is happening in public. It's not one person having a conversation this way, and it's not the other gender having a conversation this
Mhm.
way. It's both parties having a conversation. And that's where the awareness sort of meets and marries worlds. So yeah, like I said, it's choices. And while we can't force people the same way you cannot force a victim to leave an abusive situation, you mentioned that a lot of the times victims crave that high from however bad it may be for them to go back. It takes on average victims 7 to 10 times to leave these abusive relationships. And that's if they leave with
Mhm.
their life. And so, it's because, again, like you said, they crave this high until they realize that it's really no good for them. It's that choice, it's that concerted choice to leave, and it's the same way that abusers can do the same. So I just wanted
Yeah,
to
I
drop
just
my
want to
2 cents.
clarify real quick. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I don't want to, I don't want there to be a misconception. What happened to you as a child is not your fault,
absolutely.
regardless of whether you're a perpetrator or victim. When you're an adult, it's your responsibility to deal with your trauma, whatever
Hmm.
that is. Just like addicts, just like gamblers, just like all the things that impact us as people, the people, those of us who have eating disorders, those of us who have substance abuse, those are all ways of coping with trauma. And so is violence. And
Yeah,
so is and so, or being a victim of violence is another way of coping with trauma. What all I'm saying is that we have, if someone works hard enough, the tools are available for them to
absolutely.
change themselves. So it's not, because a lot of times men or the perpetrators, I don't want to say all men, but perpetrators hide behind that. It's my personality. I couldn't help it. That's just the way I am. No, no, you do. Just like a victim has the ability
Choice. Yeah,
to deal with the chemicals that are happening in their brain and reprogramming their behavior and reprogramming their brain and dealing with all the stuff that comes with therapy and mental health, so does the perpetrator. So all I'm saying is they have a choice. They can change. This is not who you are. This is what you learned, is a behavior that you can do the hard work, because it's not easy, of changing and get better. But it's a choice that you have to make.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
I just don't want, I hate the idea that people feel like they have no control. Like it's just who they are, it's their personality, and accept it or leave it. No, you can, and then there's so much shame around it, right? There's shame around the for the victims, right? We've been shamed all our lives. Why don't you just leave? Why don't you this? You could have a choice. You're so this, and then there's, the perpetrators who never seek help, although they can, and it's available, because of the shame of, this is just, I'm a bad person and I'm just going to accept it and continue to be a bad person. And that's just not the
Yeah.
reality.
And I think that's a good segue into how folks can become part of the solution and even seek help themselves. So, as you said, there's help across the board for everyone. There are many domestic violence agencies throughout the United States and really the world. You just have to look. And a lot of times when folks hear, I know for myself, that was the deal when I heard about what help was. It was very daunting and I shied away from it. But there are very many domestic violence agencies that you think to yourself, oh, it's a big open room with beds with a bunch of people that I don't know, and that's where I'm going. And that's not the case. Domestic violence agencies offer so many services, including counseling, one-on-one support groups, counseling for your children, because absolutely they're often the forgotten victims in these situations, and they absolutely need the unlearning as well. So counseling, one-on-one support groups, trauma counseling for kids, education workshops, financial assistance, shelter, obviously, where you have your own room. You're not sharing a big room with someone else. You have your own bedroom, and then you do share, obviously, the common areas like the kitchen and the living room and the washer, the laundry. But they offer so many services, and then a lot of them have community representatives that will meet you where you're at. So you can't go directly to a DV agency to do an intake. They will meet you at a Dunkin', at a library. They will come out and again meet you where you're at. So domestic violence resources are available everywhere, not just for victims, but for also perpetrators. There are workshops that are offered free of charge to abusers who are ready and willing to do the work, because it takes a lot, right? It's not just showing up and saying, oh, I caused harm and I want to stop. It's really putting in the work over a period of time, as you said, Nancy, to be able to get to the other side. So resources are available nationwide. You just have to look. All you got to do is type in domestic violence agency in my area, and I promise you one will pop up. You can reach out to us at Love Life Now Foundation. You can visit the National Domestic Violence Hotline, 800-799-SAFE, 800-799-SAFE, and you can visit the hotline.org online. So and as far as the equipment finance industry, the way that you can be part of the solution is having the conversation, opening up the doors. There's a lot of, we do share the month with breast cancer awareness, and shout out to all of the breast cancer survivors. But domestic violence awareness is also in October. So having conversations, open discussion at your companies, hiring workshop facilitators to come in and talk to employees about what the awareness issues are, how they can recognize abuse, from managers go down, to be able to spot that something might be happening with your employees. And I can tell you succinctly, in every company, there's at least one person that's experiencing some sort of form of abuse. So don't shy away and say it's not happening here. It is happening everywhere. So it's just you taking charge and being able to facilitate prevention around it, putting up flyers in your bathroom stalls, and listing what the domestic violence agency is in your area and the things that others can do to keep each other safe. So I'll stop there. But is there anything else you want to add, Nancy?
No, I think you did an amazing job at educating, giving the information. I would just say that we have to make the conversation around mental health normalized. We have to normalize it and make it a common everyday conversation. Just like we talk about, people can freely talk about a heart attack, but they can't freely talk about mental health challenges. And that's part of the
Which
issue.
can
And
lead
also,
to a heart attack.
yes, and then also conflating there's a big difference between mental health, which is, everyday, dealing with everyday stuff, and mental illness, which is, that's a whole different thing, like schizophrenia and other issues that people deal with, and people, I think, confuse the two. And so oftentimes that's part of the stigma. And I think that the moment we are able to have these open conversations and acknowledge that we all experience mental health is just part of the human experience, then the more we can create awareness and open dialogue, and ideally, like Jesse said, change this global issue.
Yeah, most definitely.
Perfect. Well, thank you, ladies. This is other than the topic of conversation, I really didn't have to say anything because you both handle this very well. So thank
We
you very much.
appreciate you for
Thank you.
creating space to be able to have the
Yes.
conversation. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
We really
and
do.
not a problem. And working with both of you on some projects and everything else, understanding the statistics. You know, perpetrators can be women too. Just throwing that out there. Just gotta
Yeah,
say it.
Both ways. Yeah,
But
absolutely.
you know, overcoming that shame, I think, is the hardest part, because people sit there and they like, okay, I don't want to be that victim. What does that do to my career? I think that's providing that safe space for those people to be able to actually have an open and honest conversation is key. So for those of you watching this, feel free to reach out to Lovern or Nancy if you just need someone to talk to, or me. I can provide you you know, the right information as well.
Yeah.
But I'll make sure I put your ladies contact information after this as well.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Okay. Well,
Bye.
appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you both soon. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you,
Thank
Tracy.
you. Thank you,
Thank you.
Lovern. Bye.
Thank you, Nancy.